Okay, welcome everyone. That's 1 p.m. local time. So let's go ahead and make a start for our session today. Still have a little bit of background music there. I don't know if Beth, if you're able to shut that off for us before we can get into this, that'd be perfect. But yeah, delighted to welcome you all to today's session. Thank you very much. We've got a number of attendees registered for today's webinar, which is the latest, of course, in the COMET webinar series, which we will give a quick overview of shortly in terms of what we've covered so far and, of course, what is still to come later on in the year. But welcome if you're joining from the UK, if you're joining from across the pond, far east part of the world, then yeah, very much welcome and delighted to have you all for today's webinar, which, of course, is focusing on mastering your root cause analysis. As it says there, my name is Craig Smith. I lead the kind of delivery operations and L&D team here at COMET. Some of you, of course, may know me. Certainly, if you are from within the COMET community already, then thanks for coming along. But also a special welcome to those of you that are joining us from out with the COMET community that might just be here looking for some useful hints and tips and additional insights and techniques around conducting effective RCA more broadly within your organization. So welcome to you. And hopefully that what we've designed and set up for today's webinar will cover both of those things. So if you're within a current organization using COMET and you are a COMET user, then we will be taking a deep dive today into some of the more detail of the root cause analysis that sit within COMET specifically. But as I say, more generally, we will talk about principles and good practice more broadly. So hopefully everyone will get something out of today's webinar. I'm a firm believer that these things, yes, we're here to pass on information, but I really do want you all to be able to take something away from it as well. And hopefully the next 45, 50 minutes up to an hour will be time well spent. So yeah, welcome. Delighted to have you here for this afternoon's webinar. Just as a little bit of a reminder then for all of the things that we are covering this year that you might want to sign up to, if not already. We've already covered a couple of key topics this year. We looked at a specific approach to managing risk through audits and investigations, really within the port sector. We covered that in February, and my colleague Doug did a session around insights around data capture in March. So in terms of what we have for the rest of the series then, as we move on today, of course, we're looking at more detail in COMET factor and root cause analysis. As we go beyond that then, we're going to look at the art of data-driven decision-making for people leaders. Effective report writing, as easy as ABC, as we like to call it. The benefits of site-based reporting as well, really useful in terms of that initial incident and event capture. We're going to do a little bit on the people side of things through ED&I, and we're going to close out the year by taking a unique take on root cause analysis, which is introducing you to our two root cause scoundrels, Pete and Roy. And they take a look at both proactive and reactive root cause analysis. So that's our webinar series. So as I've said, please, if not already, sign up to those. And likewise, we're also running some podcasts now. We've got a podcast series running. We've issued a couple already, and we've got a few more scheduled for the year. So hopefully lots of useful content that you can take advantage of over the next few months. Okay, in terms of today then, what are we going to cover? We are going to look at the principles of effective root cause analysis and learning from incidents. We are going to explore, as I've said, in a little bit more detail, COMET's root maps and root cause analysis for improved investigation outcomes. And we'll also take a little bit of a look at what that means from a data perspective as well. So why is root cause analysis important? It's important for individual investigation learning, of course, but it's also really important in terms of the big picture and what data is really at our fingertips at the moment. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight as well on that final session on what's coming down the road soon in terms of COMET development, and with the ability to actually layer an intelligent approach over your investigation outcomes, as well as any of your initial report findings within perhaps an incumbent EHS management system, and how you can get benefit from that as well. So I'll touch on that briefly toward the end of today's session. We have the comment section on the right-hand side. Please feel free to pop any questions or comments into that. If I get an opportunity throughout today's webinar, I will reply to those, certainly at the end as well, hopefully. And I will sign off with my own contact details as well. So if you have any follow-up questions and you want to get in touch, then feel free to do that, and I will soon get back to you. And likewise, if anyone wants a copy of any of the materials or slides, or indeed a recording of the video, then certainly we can provide access to that as well. So hopefully that's what you've signed up for today, and you'll get, as I've said, some kind of benefit from today's session. Right, in that case, let's go ahead and move on. And let's break it down into, as I've said, 3 parts. And I want to kick off today by taking a slightly more broad view on root cause analysis. Now, I appreciate, some of you watching or listening today may well already be very experienced with root cause analysis, either from a technical or a non-technical perspective. Root cause analysis is one of those crucial areas really within any organization that we can apply either a structured or an unstructured approach to fundamentally understanding why something has happened the way it has, but then, of course, importantly, taking actions to improve it. And there are many, many different mechanisms out there for performing root cause analysis. Obviously, on behalf of COMET, we have our own structured methodology, but there are other proprietary systems that you may be familiar with, as well as more open-sourced techniques, for example, 5 whys. So really, all of the things I'm going to talk about today, particularly in part 1, is going to be relevant to any in which way you are currently running root cause analysis within your organization. So we'll talk about some of the challenges, some of the pitfalls, and some of the things that you should be looking out for as well. I'm also a little bit conscious that some people that might be dialing in or listening to this topic might be less familiar with what we mean by root cause analysis, or might have a certain view on what root cause analysis means through experience or what they've done in the past. And so let's just kind of set the scene a little bit and talk in a little bit of detail about what we're actually meaning here. So root cause analysis, commonly referred to as RCA, as I've already said, is a crucial process within really in any organization, team, department, and so on, whether it's technical or non-technical, to really understand why incidents or unplanned events occur. Okay, and I use that term purposely, unplanned events, because whether you are conducting an audit and you identify a fairly serious non-conformance, whether you are performing a task or an activity and you have an incident, then that typically is unplanned. We weren't expecting that to happen, but because of the nature, the circumstances, maybe even the impact or consequence, we then have to go and conduct some form of a root cause analysis to try and eliminate reoccurrence and really truly understand to the heart of what that actual issue is. So, of course, we want to understand what those incident characteristics look like. Importantly, we want to understand what those errors, that might be human errors, it might be common error traps in the workplace, an area that we really ought not to shy away from. We do have another webinar topic that focuses in more detail on exploring human error, but it is an important area, if not a little bit sensitive, that should still be explored within the investigation, because human error is normal, ultimately. And of course, maybe more wider organizational or equipment-related failures that, of course, can occur. But as I've said, importantly, it's about how we prevent that reoccurrence. And time again, in terms of some of the support and the services that we provide here at COMET to organizations, we do a lot of good work when it comes to doing the investigation. We do a lot of good work sometimes when it comes to doing the root cause analysis, getting to the why, so moving from the what to the why. But it's then, what do we do with that information? How do we actually implement it, track it, and how do we really know that we've improved in the kind of more immediate to longer term in the organization, and not just that plaster over a, Band-Aid over an issue and hope that it becomes a permanent solution, tends to be less effective. So this is about prevention, folks, and we're in that failure prevention space, and often that's starting in the difficult point of view, which is really learning to understand what's actually caused these events to occur in the first place, and not just taking a superficial approach to that. So regardless of industry, there are certainly some industries out there that are probably higher risk industries that are going to be fairly mature and advanced when it comes to root cause analysis. There will be other industries that probably aren't. But regardless of industry, regardless of failure type, so whether it's safety, whether it's environmental, whether it's quality assurance, whether it's security, physical or cyber, or anything else, this is where root cause analysis really plays a role. So we can perform effective, proactive, and reactive root cause analysis to really assure, I suppose, the organization from future lapse and reoccurrence, and particularly within that kind of operational space. This is where it can really have its benefit day to day, because it's that organizational learning that really impacts, hopefully in a positive way, the kind of day-to-day runnings of the organization. And if we get the learning to that point and that place in the organization, then we're really doing something right. So that kind of operational aspect, I think, is of course really important. We'll explore how to identify accurate root causes, naturally, how in the fact that they can lead to long-term improvements. And of course, we want to, and if we're serious about this stuff, then we might classify ourselves as a learning organization. And root cause analysis is one of many techniques that a learning organization can utilize in order to, of course, learn from not just, I would say, failure, not just from things that haven't gone well, but also ask ourselves a question: how do we learn from things that have gone well? And that might be a concept that's maybe a little bit new to some of you. And if you are looking to take some things away from today's session, then that might be one thing to consider. How well in your organization do you learn from things that have been done well, as well as things that haven't been done so well? It's easy to react when things go wrong, and that's fine, and we have to still do that. But how well do we celebrate success? How well do we truly learn from when we've done a task, an operation, a project well? Well, what were the characteristics that made it well, that made it good and effective? Or actually, have we just accepted that it went on time and we had no incidents and it was within budget or whatever the circumstances are? But actually, was that down to luck? Was that down to over-reliance on a certain individual, for example? How much did we actually learn from that to say, well, that's how we need to repeat success in the future? So root cause analysis traditionally has its place in the reactive space when things go wrong. I want you to think about how we can use it proactively, but also in the space of how we learn from when things go well. And I think that's a really useful takeaway to have as well. So we'll touch on these kind of things in a little bit more detail, of course, as we move on through today's session. So what then are some of the, I suppose, primary principles around root cause analysis I think we'd like to try and get across? And hopefully most, if not all of these 4 or 5 points that we have there, you can relate to, hopefully you would agree with. Maybe 1 or 2 you might challenge, or you might think, oh, I'm not quite so sure about that. And that's okay. That's for the purpose of today as well, is maybe you want to take something away and think, well, I'm going to challenge that. I'm going to explore that a little bit further. The first, the starting point, folks, and I really can't emphasize this enough, is taking a structured approach to the investigation itself. So people can quite often get a little bit confused, or maybe blurred lines between the investigation, root cause analysis. It all means one and the same thing. Well, they're not really. So whilst these things are extremely closely connected, there is a difference. So running the initial investigation, that's what we would describe as data gathering. That's identifying the right witnesses, conducting effective witness interviews, trawling for and obtaining the right documentation for review, breaking down the timeline of the investigation post the incident, so scene management and control, equipment-related findings, and organizational-related findings, and so on. And the bigger picture that you can actually provide about what happened, so the factual circumstances, the chronology of the incident circumstances up to the point of that incident and even beyond it as well, that is really, really important. That will heavily influence the quality of your investigation outcomes, which is what will come out of your root cause analysis. So it's quality in for quality out. Think about root cause analysis as a machine. If you feed that machine with good quality data and information, you have a far better chance of getting a good output, which means that your preventive action programs are going to be more effective. If you base your root cause analysis outcomes on an investigation that's got fairly obvious gaps or shortcomings, then you can expect potential shortcomings in your outcomes. So it's much easier for me to sit here and talk about that, but the reality is there are, of course, operational challenges, and we won't always get all of the information, but I can't stress that enough. The quality of the investigation, taking a clear, structured approach, will give you a far better chance of success. And proportionately, we should be spending a reasonable amount of time doing that investigation before jumping into root cause analysis. So get that right as well. Investigations versus root cause analysis, these are actually, they're obviously connected, but they are separate things. Identification of accurate and contextual root causes is probably fairly obvious. That's about really getting to the why. So often, again, we'll see investigations that don't go deep enough, basically. They might stop at the what happened. They might stop at that trigger cause or that initial cause that led to the event happening on the day. That's important that we do that and we isolate those initial causes, but it's about getting down to the root causes, those underlying and deeper root causes that have actually caused the event. And importantly in your organization, the context of that root cause. So if you're using a taxonomy like COMET provides, a taxonomy of 62 coded root causes, then of course you can begin to trend and you can pick up on those issues. But the context of why that root cause has occurred is really, really important as well. So it's not just about, well, that was the issue and let's go and fix it. Okay, but what were the circumstances around that issue? Why was that issue allowed to manifest or occur in the way that it did? Is it something we know about? Is it something that's less frequent that we weren't aware of as an issue? What's the kind of bigger picture, the context around that root cause? Gives you a much better chance to fix it as well. So get to the why. Sounds obvious, but it's really, really important. Please avoid blame. It's much easier to fix the process than fix the worker. The old saying goes, it's easier to bend a piece of metal than it is to bend an arm. So yes, when we focus on human error outcomes only, and we don't, again, get to the why properly, then you might, if you're lucky, get a short-term reaction, short-term response or improvement, but medium to long-term, we will revert to type. And let's really think a little bit deeper. And if we have that blame game, then unfortunately, that's really going to restrict people in the future from a more culture perspective, wanting to open up, be willing to share, what happened and how we can prevent it. So trying to create that culture that moves away from blame is a lot more just and fair. And accepting, actually, that human error, frankly, is normal. And these things will happen. And let's treat that in the right way. And again, the value that can be had from that is immeasurable. Of course, evidence-based decision-making, don't jump to conclusions. You might have conclusions. You, as an experienced investigator, will quite often have a fair idea about what happened and why it happened and likely what the causes were. That's okay. That is okay to have these views. Just don't be necessarily led by them. And if you find evidence to substantiate and support a view or a hypothesis, then that's fine. That is absolutely fine. So I'm not sitting here telling you to ignore your gut instinct. That's quite the opposite. And all of the training that we provide here at COMET, we talk a lot about investigation experience and following those experiences that you have, but you've got to do it in the right way, and you don't want your outcomes to be led purely based on what you think or assume. Make sure that things are evidence-based as well. And using a taxonomy can really help. Necessarily within COMET, of course, we do have a coded taxonomy. There are other proprietary systems that do similar. But quite a lot of systems out there might have pick lists. They might be fairly open-ended 5 whys, where you as the investigator are essentially having to come up with that root cause each and every time. Makes it very difficult for trending at a more systemic level. Makes it very difficult to isolate what your specific issues are. So what's that 80-20 rule? Typically, 20% of your kind of root cause outcomes or the things that you're aware of will actually lead to 80% of your harm or your problems that you're having. So how can you isolate and understand what that 20% is loosely if we don't have a framework and a clear taxonomy for capturing that information? So again, something that I'd really encourage you to do. It makes your life a lot easier. Be consistent with your approach to both investigations and root cause analysis. So those are some of the sort of 4 or 5 key principles that we would touch on. And yeah, certainly, hopefully you found those reasonably useful, and certainly you can agree with most of those as well. One or more of these common pitfalls, again, we do see these occurring regularly. I tried to design today's input based on fairly recent experiences that we've had as an organization out there within different industries across different parts of the world, and what some of these common pitfalls are. There are definite synergies here, that are definite consistent themes that come out quite a lot, whether it's within kind of management and leadership within organizations, whether it's a little bit more broad or even specific than that. But these are some of the things that we see that we try to educate against. So, for example, the silver bullet. There might be an idea in certain organizations that within any investigation, what was the root cause? What was the one thing that if we'd stopped that or prevented that would have ultimately allowed us to prevent everything else from happening? Well, that's a really dangerous situation to be in, because you're severely restricting the opportunity for learning and uncovering other potential issues that took place during that incident or that circumstances around the incident. So don't have the approach of a single mindset silver bullet. Often there's no such thing. And again, having a taxonomy, having a framework to follow for your root cause analysis will at least guide you to exploring all potential outcomes. And it might only be that you have a couple of root causes or 3 and that's fine. I'm not saying you should have a dozen root causes. That's unrealistic as well. But try and avoid the silver bullet. You give yourself a much better chance for more broader organizational learning. You can, of course, prioritize your outcomes and your actions, but let's not prioritize root causes necessarily. Often, again, stopping at the what. I touched on this a few moments ago. We do a good investigation, but we simply don't drill down deep enough into the occurrences, into the whys. So why that error occurred, why that initiating factor occurred, why that equipment failure occurred. It can be all too easy to stop at the circumstances as we know it and not drill deep enough. So let's think about that in your investigations. Think about what you're investigating, and then from there, use that information to understand, well, why did it happen in the first place? So it's that transition from what to why. And if you get that clear in your head, then often you'll do a pretty good job, I think, of getting to those kind of bottom line issues. Tunnel vision, don't just focus on human error or the obvious issues. Explore the broader profile. Again, can be very, very easy to happen, where you get into a very focused mindset. That mindset might take you down rabbit holes, for example, that actually you're not getting any value out of. So it's really important, folks, in an investigation to take a step back, often look at the bigger picture. The caveat to tunnel vision is when you are root cause analyzing a specific issue, then you do have to focus on the circumstances of that issue. So an example might be if I'm running an investigation, let's say into a plant shutdown where a compressor has tripped. I might identify that compressor tripping as an initiating equipment failure. So I want to investigate why that happened. But in that set of circumstances, I might also uncover an organizational shortfall that led to the fact that we had less resources within the maintenance team than we ought to have. So we've got a kind of an organizational factor going on there. And I might also have a decision-making process on the day where a supervisor has chosen to prioritize another piece of work, and therefore a piece of maintenance got missed. So then I've got a kind of human factor. So in my investigation of this plant tripping or sort of shutting down productivity for a while, I've suddenly identified that isolated these 3 kind of higher level issues. But I have to take a deep dive into each one of those to individually understand what caused them. So I'm actually doing 3 sets of root cause analysis into one bigger incident. That's perfectly normal. So see it like that. One investigation, one set of bigger circumstances, will often lead to individual silos of root cause analysis, because the reason these things happen can be for very different reasons. And so you do sometimes have to go into tunnel vision mode to isolate specifics, but it's really important that you never lose sight of the bigger picture. And that's where the true learning can come from. Fix what you can fix. Be realistic. Again, I've touched on that a little bit there by breaking it down. You know, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. Don't try and fix it all at once. Focus on what you can. Often low-hanging fruit, get some early wins. That might be enough. And then you can obviously go into more detail as required, but don't try and bite off more than you can realistically chew, because if you have too much information, too much detail, and you get lost in the weeds of that information, then how do you really know what to fix? How do you really understand the kind of wood from the trees, and do we really understand where we need to take the outcomes of the investigation? So don't try and fix it all at once either. And of course, and it can happen as well, but making that distinction between direct causes for root causes as well. So remember, direct initiating factors are what happened, typically in the chronology leading up to that event. So it's these factors that have triggered the event to happen. We call these, in the world of COMET, we call them COMET factors: human errors, organizational shortfalls, and equipment failures. More broadly, they are simply immediate causes, direct causes, causal factors. But that's still fundamentally what happened. Root causes are why those things happened. And that's why you might end up doing multiple sets of actual root cause analysis on one investigation. That's perfectly normal and actually acceptable. So I've thrown a fair bit of information at you there, but if you're able to avoid some of those common pitfalls, then again, you're probably got a reasonable chance of conducting good quality investigations and root cause analysis, I would say, within your investigations. Learning from incidents, really important. Okay, so what do we do with this? What do we do with this information when it comes out? So, of course, preventive action programs, we advocate SMART or smarter actions, so specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, timely, and so on. There are variations of that. You can research and Google that for yourself, of course. Other search engines do exist. But yeah, of course, preventive action outcomes, we call them preventive because they are designed to prevent reoccurrence. If in the immediate aftermath of an incident, there might be some short-term corrective actions taken to try and put right a situation, that's okay. But in terms of investigations, we do talk about preventive action outcomes. Measuring success, okay, so how do we know that these actions and things that we've implemented have actually been successful? That's where the SMART ER comes into the SMART actions. Okay, so evaluating and reviewing the quality of our actions is really important. How do you verify the logic, and how do you verify that these actions have actually worked longer term? Of course, being proactive, sharing lessons, certainly organizational wide, not just within the same department or team where that event might have occurred, but cross-functional learning is really important. Might be geographically, might be within your business structure. And hey, even beyond that, in terms of industry-wide, in terms of these flash kind of lessons learned alerts, can be really, really useful, because at the end of the day, folks, this is about prevention. Identifying and addressing those blockers to root cause analysis. So, but why would we do that? Because this is the way we've always done it. Yeah, we've had an incident, but it was pretty minor. So let's not worry too much about that. The more and more minor incidents that you have, logically, one day that is probably going to lead to, depending on the characteristics, of course, fair chance that may end up leading to something far more significant. So let's not ignore those minor events. So that kind of habitual, but that's the way we always done it, can be quite a dangerous space to be in as well. So let's not be scared to think outside of the box and come up with properly designed fixes. And of course, tracking trends and performance as well. So what are you benefiting from your efforts? If you're doing lots and lots of individual investigations and root cause analysis, and you're getting these little fixes over here and over there, well, that's great. But what's the uplift? What are you learning at department level? What are you learning at an organizational level? And that's really where root cause analysis should come into its own. And of course, there's lots and lots of ways out there now. You know, we utilize Power BI. We integrate those dashboards within our systems so that you get at the touch of a fingertips, you get those insights. And again, we're even, as I've mentioned in my introduction today, we're taking that a step further now by introducing another set of tools that will allow far deeper insights in relation to those investigation outcomes. Not just investigation outcomes, but the reporting of any manner of event, observation, and so on, near misses. So again, it's really important to think about what are we getting out of it. So if you're using a system, and this is not a sales pitch, by the way, but if you're using a system at the moment where you think it's a little bit too clunky, or it's a little bit too, we only use it for individual investigations and we're not really getting wider uplift, then I would challenge that in this day and age. And I would say, well, what are we really learning? Not just learning from one incident, but you learn a lot more from 10. You learn a lot more from 50 and 100 because you're getting that more systemic uplift. So ask yourself that question again. Really, what benefits are you actually getting out of all that root cause analysis effort that you're conducting at the moment? So yeah, if we don't learn ultimately, then you could argue, what is the point, I suppose, of going into this detail? Okay, to wrap up that kind of initial part one, remember, effective RCA, root cause analysis, and of course the learning from these things are essential components. If we're wanting to not just improve our safety, quality, but our wider performance and efficiencies, then having an effective, structured, consistent root cause analysis method is really important. Be systemic, okay? So if we're going to systemically think about and how we can uncover and address root causation at a higher level, then of course that's what can drive continuous improvement more strategically, not just at a ground level, not just at a one incident at a time level, but how do we learn from that at a mid layer? How do we learn from that at a higher layer for cross-functional learning? Really, really important. And of course, by applying, as I've said numerous times now, structured methodologies, of course, like COMET, but there are others, and an openness to that change, which is really important. That's always the way we've done it around here. So let's challenge that a little bit. Then, of course, we can turn events and things that have maybe gone wrong or had the potential to really go wrong. Actually, we can turn these into opportunities proactively, and we can actually really learn from them for future success. So there you go. That's my plea to you as well. So hopefully, there's been a couple of things in that kind of little first session there that you found reasonably useful. Okay. Right, moving on then. So again, hopefully, yeah, for the kind of broader audience, some useful hints and tips in there, as well as those of you specifically within the COMET community. This section I'm going to dive into now does take a little bit more of a specific look at COMET. COMET, in terms of root cause analysis, has 5 parent categories to dive into. And that's what COMET actually stands for. So in a COMET investigation, you will explore communication, you will explore the operating environment, you will explore management, equipment, and training. Okay, that's what the 5 COMET categories relate to. And within those 5 categories, we then break it down into what we call subcategories. So each of the COMET has a minimum of 2 subcategories to explore for root causation. And within those 12 subcategories, they will ultimately lead you to a possible one of 62 root causes. So there are 62 coded root causes that sit across the 5 COMET categories. And of course, for those of you that are COMET practitioners, you will be well aware, hopefully, of that. What I want to do on this session today is, I suppose, provide a little bit of a reminder of not all of those categories. We don't have time for that, but I've hand selected a handful to look at. Just to take a little bit of a deep dive into some of those areas, some of those important learning areas to make sure that our root cause analysis is as effective as it can be, and that you do fully understand and how to interpret the COMET system as well. Now, before we get into that, I'm going to remind all you COMET users and practitioners, and a little bit of additional insight for those of you that are not, perhaps, within the world of COMET, but certainly in general within the world of root cause analysis, we believe in 3 core truths or 3 core principles that you should apply each and every time. The first core principle is that root causes don't occur in isolation. That's taken me back to my point about there's no such thing as a silver bullet. Okay. And certainly the way that the COMET system is designed, remember, is that it is asking you to explore each of the 5 areas and the 12 subcategories and so on. So the chance of doing an investigation and only getting 1 root cause is very, very rare. You should be expecting to get a minimum of 2 root causes within your investigation outcomes. And that's you getting much better cross-learning in more than just one area. So it's to try and avoid that sort of tunnel vision kind of bias approach and let's keep it a little bit more open-minded. The second truth is that root causes don't have a hierarchy of seriousness. Okay, so again, we don't prioritize root causes. Root causes don't necessarily know the impact of themselves, if that makes sense. So some root causes, might lead to a minor incident event. That same root cause might play a role in a much more serious event. Often it's down to circumstances, conditions, luck, characteristics of the day. And so root causes don't come with they don't come with a kind of a label in terms of their seriousness. So we really shouldn't be kind of prioritizing that within our investigations either. They all have the potential to hurt us. And finally, root causes don't change based on failure type. So again, a really good taxonomy that we like to think COMET is, of course, allows you to apply that same taxonomy, that same root cause structure to a whole range of event types, whether it's safety, environmental, equipment, quality, and so on. The root causes allow you to do that. The slight caveat to that in COMET, we do have something called smart root maps. So we do apply a diagnostic layer to root cause analysis in COMET. So if you're investigating, let's say, a safety event, you do get the root cause language is tailored to safety. If you're investigating a quality non-conformance, the root cause language is tailored to quality, and so on. So we do have these smart lenses that sit across our root causes, but fundamentally the root cause context and the structure, of course, doesn't change. So worthwhile remembering that as well. So if you believe in and you agree with those three core truths that sit within COMET, then you won't stray too far from the truth. Now I'm just going to break down. I'm going to give you some top tips, just as a little bit of a reminder here in relation to some of the COMET categories. So if we take a deep dive initially into the world of written communication, remember we've got the coded root causes C1 to C6. This is all about the quality and the effectiveness of our written communication root causes. So PPIG in the world of COMET represents policies, procedures, instructions, and guidance. So the one thing to remember here, folks, is this is about the availability, the quality, and indeed the existence of PPIG within the organization and how well that's been communicated. You can see the root causes there. C1, PPIG, too complex or confusing, right down to C5, difficult to access by users. Well, that's all challenging the quality and the effectiveness of an existing PPIG. C6, there are no written PPIG for the task or the activity. So you have a contradiction there. So it's illogical in your investigations, if you're applying the COMET toolkit, to have either C1 to C5 and C6 going hand in hand, because they are root causes that essentially are, the opposite of one another, because C6 is about the absence of an important PPIG. So just bear that in mind as well. And in terms of how COMET's designed in the relationships, remember as well, if you've selected any of the C1 to C6 category of root causes, also think about M7. So when we explore the management root causes, M7 also relates to the lack of an important PPIG, but the importance for management to actually create one in the first place. All right, so one's about the creation, the existence of it, and the other is about how well we communicate it, embed it, and actually roll it out within the organization. So again, just a little reminder there about some of the nuances and how your root causes do have relationships, because root causes do often go hand in hand. You will get common occurrences with root causes, and you'll get some root causes that will never go hand in hand. All right, so it's worthwhile being aware of that relationship, particularly within your own organization and within your own data. And as I say, before we close out today, I will touch on the data side of things as well. We also have a section, of course, that begins to explore human factors. So this is within our operating environment section. These often relate to root causes around human behavior, actions, inactions, during a task or within a specific working environment. A very common root cause that I'm sure you'd recognize is that top one, OE1, okay, a failure to adhere to a PPIG or taking shortcuts, okay. We describe that, folks, as a gateway root cause. That's probably the closest root cause in COMET that actually aligns more at a direct cause, because that's essentially what happened. What that root cause doesn't necessarily go into the detail of is actually why it happened. So if you're selecting OE1, think about that as a gateway root cause. So then you should be thinking about, well, what do I need to supplement that finding? What other root causes exist in the system that I know contributed to and related to why that PPIG wasn't adhered with or why a shortcut was taken? So a really important root cause to think about. OE1 should never sit on its own, is what I'm saying. So again, really important to think about those accompanying root causes. And also, where you do have more general, undesirable human behavior as an outcome, but actually you've also uncovered that there is no PPIG to govern such behavior or actions or activity, then you might want to be selecting OE3, but you will also want to then go and consider some of the management root causes, because of course it's the management section that creates that responsibility for having these root causes in place in the first instance. All right, so again, it's another example, folks, of how there might be one or two very obvious root causes, but when you then take a look at them, you think, well, hold on a minute, there's something else missing from the puzzle here that we need to cover off. If we've got undesirable human behavior and we've ticked that off with, say, OE1, and we've captured the fact that there actually wasn't a procedure for the work anyway, so we've got that in C6. Well, hold on a minute. We really ought to have a management responsibility to actually go and create this, and that's where the initial shortcoming was. So then you've got a third root cause which sits in management. So all of a sudden you've got a communication root cause, an operating environment root cause to do with the human behavior and so on, but you've also then got a management root cause that sits in the responsibility. So that suddenly you've got three really useful, tangible root causes that you can go and get after, and you can go and correct and fix. And that's how the COMET system is designed. You should be thinking about that relationships and how the system hangs together. Supervision management, a very easy one to get confused with. The first section within the management category relates to the quality of supervision and supervision management. And we've got three root causes, all similar but different. Okay, supervisor absent, abstracted, or missing. They are all subtly different. Okay, and remember that we're in the management category, so this does relate to the management of the supervisors, not necessarily the quality of the supervision, but the actual management of the supervision. So that's a subtle difference as well. Okay, so absent, planned or unplanned absence and not backfilled. Okay, so that supervisor hasn't been replaced. Abstracted, the management has made a decision to redeploy the supervisor onto something else. And again, that's left a gap where they ought to have been perhaps, or missing a personal decision by that supervisor based, however, on an organizational shortcoming or resource constraint. So they've had to take matters into their own hands and perhaps deploy themselves elsewhere because they felt like they had to turn their attention somewhere else. But that decision was driven by an organizational situation. Okay. So that's about the management, and that's how those three root causes are presented. Similar but different ultimately. Now, if the supervisor is absent, abstracted, or missing, okay, as it says there, but the reason for that actually is personal and does not fall into one of the above sections or categories, then you might want to consider OE1, which of course is that deviation from an existing PPIG, okay, or indeed, if we've got a broader issue around supervision in general, then you would probably begin to explore M4 and M5, which looks at the quality of our pre-task planning for supervision, resourcing, and so on. So there's lots of different ways in which you can kind of pull out the specific issues, and that's really just one example of how we represent that within COMET. So again, for those of you that are indeed COMET practitioners, COMET users here, just bear some of these things in mind as well. Another category that sits within management is the safe system of work. Probably quite a common area to be in. Okay, so this is how we govern our control of work, our safe systems of work. Okay, within that area through the use of effective and high quality PPIG. So again, we've got two root causes that are quite similar: weak implementation, weak enforcement. M8 and M9. So weak implementation is about how we've actually initially implemented and tried to roll something out versus the ongoing enforcement of that over time. So how well have we actually made sure that we're actually following this and it's becoming normalized. So again, there's M7, which of course, if you've got C1 to C6, you really ought to also be considering M7 because they do they do have a relationship. When it comes to M9, of course, which talks about non-compliance, if you have a one-off case of non-compliance and you've got no evidence of it happening before, it's more likely to be OE1 or OE3, okay, which was to do with the human behavior and human actions, etc. If, however, that is common practice, common behavior, common shortcut taking, common non-adherence, easy for me to say, then consider M9, because that's sitting at more of an organizational level. All right, so again, it's the subtleties and understanding and interpreting the different root causes that sit there within it as well. All right, so again, there's some useful kind of guidance sitting in and around how you want to interpret these root causes. These top tips, I would say, as I say, I've hand selected some of these. All of these are available to you as a COMET organization or a COMET user. We have done and we can make this guidance available to you. So please just either drop me a comment or indeed reach out to us separately, and I can make sure that you have access to this information. The final category within management is about learning, organizational learning and assurance. So again, some useful root causes in here to do with the ineffective capture or outcomes of previous investigations, the ineffective capture internally around observations and best practice. So again, some guidance there. And similarly, if you're looking at M12 or M14, so failing to implement or share best practice, or indeed poor ineffective implementation of previously identified actions, you might also want to consider those communication root causes C1 to C6, because that might relate to how well we actually completed that continuous assurance, that continuous improvement loop, and failed to actually roll out what that action or what those improvements should have been. So again, another example, folks, of how the system hangs together. Equipment operation, an important root cause to highlight here is E14. I'm going to make this distinction for you all now. E14 and the language of E14 has now been changed. Delighted to say COMET's spring upgrade, which is next month actually, will have some updates to some of the root causes in the language. E14 specifically has been abused in the past, I would suggest. Typically E14 should only be selected when the issue relates to a minor technical failure, as it says there, which is just not justifiable to do a more in-depth review on, and it's just not organizationally, there's no benefit to it. But it does get abused as a little bit of a get-out clause for not doing a root cause analysis or not doing a more in-depth review when maybe we should be. So we have now updated the wording of that root cause, so keep an eye out for that. But that's going to talk more about an unresolved, unknown or unmerited failure in the past. So a slight change then in the wording in relation to that as well. So keep your eye out for that one, and hopefully that will become a much more valuable root cause that sits within the COMET system. And finally, the provision of training. So again, not to be confused, we have in the final category, we have training provision, and then we also have the actual ongoing quality of training, ongoing competence assurance. So again, if we are highlighting an issue that training has not been provided or that the requirement has not been identified, then that will typically take us back into a management-related issue. And so M4, which does relate back again to our quality of our resourcing, scheduling, planning, etc., that may well flag. So you may well have a training issue, but that may also tie back into a management issue. The management category, folks, that sits right in the middle, treat that almost as the spinal cord of the whole system. More often than not, you will relate yourself back in there. So though you might have root causes in communication and training and equipment and so on, there's a very strong chance you will almost definitely have root causes within that singular management category as well. And that's maybe a good way to think about it, as your root causes there, and then how do they branch off. That mindset will give you a really effective way actually of running your root cause analysis. So there's obviously more categories than the ones I've just shown you, but yeah, I wanted to sort of pick a few common ones that might cause us a little bit of angst or confusion, particularly with some of the root causes there. And that's exactly some of the key points that we wanted to get across. But remember, if you want more information on this, or you want the actual, we have this kind of quick reference guide, then as I've said, feel free to just reach out. As you've got there, the root map quick reference guide, we can provide that. And just remember, folks, when conducting a root cause analysis, 2 to 4 root causes is your magic number, okay? So if it's a bigger full COMET investigation and you've got multiple COMET factors, which will be quite often the case, you ought to be looking for between 2 and 4 root causes, okay, for each of those individual COMET factors. That's that individual root cause analysis that I talk about. If you're performing a COMET Light investigation, okay, which is for low-level, voluminous, a proportionate investigation response, of course, then you ought to be looking for a maximum of 2 to 4 root causes in total for that investigation. So ultimately, folks, when it comes to root cause analysis, 2 to 4 is your magic number. Less is more, okay? Less is more. If you come away with 8, 10, 12 root causes, you really begin to get lost in the detail. Where do you go from there? How can you possibly fix all those issues realistically? You can't. It's impossible. You have to fix what you can fix. You have to focus on what you can really focus on. And less is more. It gives you far more focus. It gives you something to really develop out and try and fix. If you muddy the waters too much and you have too many root causes going on, you will lose your way entirely. So it might seem a little bit contradictory to investigations and root cause analysis, but my advice would be less is more. Okay, good. And the final part for today, just in the last sort of 5 minutes or so that we have remaining, I just want to remind you, I suppose, of the importance of data here. Now, yes, we have already ran a webinar last month, I think it was, on data analysis and insights. So if any of you were on that, then fantastic. If any of you weren't on that, but this sparked some thought, then I'm sure we can get a recording of that webinar for you. But as I've said a couple of times now throughout this session, it's all very well and good learning from one investigation at a time, but how do we get the benefit of that at a bigger, more systemic picture? Okay, and again, what I'm going to showcase you is just some examples of what COMET can produce, but more broadly in terms of Power BI. Again, there are other mechanisms out there for doing this, of course, is fine, but this is where the real benefit to doing proper organizational root cause analysis can come from. So you can begin to isolate your top 10 occurrences, for example. So what's our trends of root causes? Isolating the top 10 root causes. But importantly, I might want to look at that root cause learning through the lens of specific changes. So again, a really important factor in any investigation is the specific changes. All right. So what was that adverse change? What was that adverse impact? Well, how does that correlate to my root cause outcomes? Okay. You can also do that through the layer of your barrier evaluation. So what were my failed and missing barriers? So what's my relationship between my root causes and my barriers? You will have a relationship there. So you can isolate these findings as well. And all of a sudden that becomes a lot more interesting than just some numbers. All right. So again, think about that as well. Use the data, use the dashboards that are there to really explore what that data means and how it correlates and relates to other things that sit alongside it, because that's where the real benefit lies. We of course ask you to make use of all of these various dashboards, and of course we do have inbuilt quality metrics where you can now go ahead and actually score the quality of your investigations and the outcomes. So the quality of your COMET factors, your human factors, and your root causes. So again, really important. You might want to say, well, we're really good at COMET factor identification, but we're not good at human factors. So why do we have why do we not have that correlation? Equally, we might be very, very good at selecting the right proportion of root causes, but we're not very good at providing good context and evidence behind that root cause. So we're missing out on an opportunity there. So again, all this information is at your fingertips. And of course, the other little screenshot I've put on there, you can't really read that. But again, what the system will also allow you to do, of course, is, or any good system will allow you to do, is begin to capture investigator behavior. So do you have investigators that tend to always go down the same route of outcomes, maybe have quite a bias approach? That might not be the healthiest way to approach your investigations, versus somebody who is quite open to the full spectrum of root cause. And therefore they have quite a wide, broader selection because they're using the system more frequently and they understand all of the elements of potential improvement. So again, how well are we actually using and exploring the system is something to really think about. Of course, you can pick up on trends. So there we've got M6 is trending down the way. We've got OE1 has trended up, it's spiked. C4 is trending down the way. M4 has trended up, but it's leveled off a little bit. So again, you can use the data to begin to understand correlation, timings of root causes, and how those trends are really coming to life. And importantly as well, you've also got a root cause matrix. So it's not just about individual root cause outcomes and individual root cause, analysis and learnings, but how commonly are root causes occurring along with one another. So I can see right there in my little heat map here that, M4 and OE1, they go hand in hand quite a lot. So at an organizational level, I might be thinking, well, why is that? So I can drill that down to a site level, a location level, right down even to an individual investigator, or at a broader level. You can go as high or as narrow as you want with all of this information. But that's where the learning comes out of it. But of course, this is about turning data into information, which becomes intelligence. So data is what we provide the system. Information is what I'm showing you here. So how do we actually turn that data into something valuable that we can actually tangibly use and learn from? So turning the numbers and the graphs into words and language that we can actually use. That's information. That's useful to a degree. But of course, the intelligent part kicks in above that, which is, well, what are we now going to do with this information? What does this information actually tell us? And how does that inform our future decision making? And I've mentioned it once or twice already, but for those of you that are interested, keep your eyes peeled for the next few months, because we are currently working on it does involve AI, but it's AI built behind the firewall, your firewall, built specifically within COMET database, looking at your COMET data, looking at your incumbent EHS system data, and overlaying that with our AI signals tool that will really allow you to take this information, as I say, this is data and information, and really applying an intelligent layer to it that can start to give you notifications and trends and so on for future decision making. So really, really useful. But data and information, it's about what you do with it. It's all great having it, but it's about interpreting it and making those right decisions from it as well. So that's my sermon for the day over. I do hope that you found some of that useful. If you want a copy, I can see a couple of the messages in the chat there. No problem at all, Steve. That's not an issue. Anthony, no problem. We can share these things out. If you want any more information, folks, not a problem. We're more than happy to come and do lunch and learns in your organization. We can run these specifically for your teams if you want as well. Not a problem. Just reach out for any further information. That's our genetic contact details. But as I've said, my name's Craig Smith, and I really hope that you've enjoyed today's session. So thank you very much. I've timed that pretty well, I think, just under the hour. So I wish you all the best. Enjoy the rest of your afternoons, and thanks for attending.